My name is David Miller. I am 42 years old. For a decade, my world was a canvas painted in unyielding, oppressive black. 10 years. A quarter of my life spent navigating by touch, by sound, by the unwavering voice of my wife, Sarah. We lived in a cozy, albeit somewhat cluttered, two-story house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado. Our days were a routine born of necessity and what I believed was deep affection. Sarah was my eyes, my guide, my constant. She read to me, described the changing seasons, helped me with everything from choosing my clothes to stir my morning coffee. Her patience, her seemingly boundless well of compassion, was the very air I breathed. I trusted her implicitly, with a faith that had only deepened with the onset of my blindness, an unfortunate consequence of a rare neurological condition that had slowly, then suddenly, stolen my sight. Life had adapted, as it always does. We had our inside jokes about my clumsiness, our shared silences filled with comfortable understanding. Our friends, mostly couples we'd known since college, would come over for barbecue nights in our backyard, their laughter a familiar melody against the chirping crickets. I learned to distinguish each of their voices, the particular cadence of their steps. There was Mark Peterson, Sarah's closest friend, almost like a brother to her. He was always jovial, his booming laugh echoing through the house. He'd often joke about how I knew more about his life than he did, just by listening. Sarah would playfully scold him for talking too much, but I could hear the affection in her voice. I was secure in my world, cocooned in the warmth of what I believed was an unbreakable bond. Then a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the all-encompassing darkness. It started as a phantom sensation, a ghost of light at the very edge of my perception. I dismissed it initially, a cruel trick of the mind, but it persisted, growing stronger, like a distant star slowly emerging from the void. I mentioned it to Sarah, hesitantly at first. She was dismissive, attributing it to wishful thinking, a common phenomenon in those with long-term visual impairment. But the sensation intensified. It became a yearning, a desperate hope. One crisp autumn morning, a referral came through for a new experimental treatment at a cutting-edge clinic in Boston. Sarah had found it, she said, after countless hours of research. I remember the flutter of excitement, quickly followed by a pang of fear. What if it didn't work? What if this fragile hope was shattered? Sarah, ever pragmatist, encouraged me to go. What have you got to lose, David? She'd said, her voice firm yet gentle. Even a tiny chance is worth taking. We packed a small bag, most of my essentials, and a few of her comforting possessions. The flight to Boston was a blur of muffled sounds and the constant, reassuring pressure of Sarah's hand in mine. The clinic was state-of-the-art, a hushed sanctuary of medical innovation. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The procedure was complex, delicate, involving intricate neural pathways and microscopic laser technology. The recovery, they warned, would be gradual, and there was no guarantee of full sight. Yet, I clung to every word, every sliver of possibility. Sarah stayed with me through the initial days, her presence a constant comfort. She read to me from medical pamphlets I couldn't see, explained the nurse's instructions, and held my hand during the uncomfortable post-operative checks. Her dedication was unwavering, or so I believed. After a week, she had to return to Denver for work, promising to fly back as soon as she could. I told her not to worry, that I was in good hands. A lie, perhaps, but a comforting one. I missed her terribly, the silence of the recovery room amplifying her absence. The days crawled by, each one a testament to my patience. Then, the bandages came off. The world didn't explode into color immediately, as I perhaps fantasized. It was a hazy, indistinct blur, like looking through a frosted window. But it was something, a differentiation between light and shadow, the vague outlines of objects. With each passing day, the fog receded, the colors sharpened, the forms solidified. It was a slow, arduous process of relearning to see, to interpret the visual information my brain had long forgotten how to process. The joy was overwhelming, a torrent of emotion I could barely contain. I saw the green of the trees outside my window, the vibrant blue of the nurse's scrubs, The subtle nuances of light falling across the room. I could see again. After 10 years, I could see. But with this miraculous gift came a profound, unsettling realization. The doctors had stressed the importance of a gradual reintroduction to my old life to avoid overwhelming my newly restored vision. They suggested I take it easy, process things slowly. A peculiar thought began to form in my mind, a quiet whisper that turned into a persistent hum. What if I didn't tell Sarah immediately? What if I held on to the secret, just for a little while, to observe, to see how our life truly operated when I wasn't just a blind man relying on her every move? It was a selfish thought, perhaps, but a powerful one. A chance to truly see, not just with my eyes, but with an unclouded perspective, what lay beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. The decision to keep my sight a secret from Sarah wasn't born of malice, but a quiet, creeping doubt. It was a strange, almost unsettling instinct, one that wore with the immense gratitude I felt for her unwavering support during my years of darkness. Part of me, the part that still clung to the idealized image of our life together, wanted to rush home, to throw my arms around her and share the miracle. But another, colder part, a newly awakened observer, urged caution. The doctors had emphasized the fragile nature of my recovery, the need for a gradual return to my old life. This, I rationalized, could be part of that process. A private period of adjustment, a subtle re-entry into the world of the sighted, unseen by the one person whose reaction I now felt a strange apprehension about. I called Sarah and told her the good news, meticulously omitting the crucial detail of my restored vision. The procedure was a success, darling, I'd said, my voice carefully modulated to sound excited but not overly so. The doctors are optimistic about a partial return, maybe enough to distinguish shapes and light. Her reaction was exactly as I'd anticipated. Relief, joy, a tearful "thank God" through the phone. She spoke of coming back to Boston, but I insisted she wait. They want me to stay for a few more weeks of observation and physical therapy. I lied smoothly. It's better if I focus on my recovery, without any distractions. You can visit when I'm a bit further along. It felt like a betrayal, a sharp pang of guilt. But the impulse to watch, to truly see her without her knowing she was being watched, was too strong to resist. The next few weeks were a surreal exercise in deception. During the day, I underwent rigorous therapy, relearning depth perception, recognizing faces, navigating complex environments. I walked the streets of Boston, marveling at the vibrant tapestry of urban life, the intricate details of historical buildings, the endless parade of diverse faces. I found a small coffee shop near the clinic, its aroma of freshly brewed coffee a comforting constant, where I'd sit for hours, simply observing. I saw couples holding hands, friends laughing, people lost in their own thoughts. I began to pick up on nuances I'd never noticed before, the subtle shifts in body language, the fleeting expressions that spoke volumes. It was an education, a crash course in human interaction from an entirely new perspective. In the evenings, I reverted to my role as the blind patient. When Sarah called, I'd fumble with the phone, exaggerate my clumsiness, and describe my day in terms of muffled sounds and vague sensations, just as I had for years. It was exhausting, this constant performance, but it felt necessary. A bizarre social experiment, perhaps, but one I felt compelled to conduct. I wanted to see if her attentiveness, her patience, her unwavering support was truly unconditional, or if it was inextricably linked to my vulnerability. It was a dark thought, I knew, but one that gnawed at me. As my discharge date approached, I booked a flight back to Denver, choosing a time when Sarah would normally be at work. I wanted to surprise her, to truly gauge her immediate, unfiltered reaction to my homecoming, and to her continued belief in my limited sight. I arranged for a car service to pick me up from the airport and drop me a few blocks from our house. The plan was to walk the remaining distance, to approach our home not as a blind man guided by another, but as a man seeing his own house for the first time in a decade. The flight felt interminable. My heart hammered with a mixture of excitement and dread. What would I find? Would our home be the haven I remembered, filled with the warmth of Sarah's presence? Or would there be cracks in the facade I'd been blind to, The car pulled up to the familiar street corner, and I stepped out, a rush of cool Denver air hitting my face. The world was vibrantly clear. The majestic Rockies loomed in the distance, their snow-capped peaks glittering in the afternoon sun. The familiar oak tree in our front yard, its leaves now a fiery orange, looked exactly as I'd pictured it. I walked slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail. The chipped paint on the porch railing, the overgrown rose bush by the front door, the subtle tilt of the mailbox. These were the small imperfections that made our house a home. My stomach tightened as I approached the front door. I paused, took a deep breath, and quietly let myself in with a spare key I always carried. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I moved to the living room, my eyes scanning every corner. Nothing seemed amiss. A book lay open on the coffee table, a half-empty mug beside it. Sarah's scent, a mix of her floral perfume, and something uniquely her, filled the air. I decided to go to the kitchen, thinking she might have left a note, or perhaps be out running an errand. As I entered the kitchen, I saw it. The back door, which led to our secluded patio, was ajar, and then I heard voices. Muffled at first, then clearer. 2 voices. One was Sarah's, undeniably. The other, a man's. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I froze, my body rigid, every sense suddenly on high alert. The sound grew louder, distinct. Laughter. Not the polite, friendly laughter I was used to hearing from Sarah. This was intimate, unrestrained, laced with a playful intimacy that sent a cold dread through me. I moved silently, my newly acute vision guiding me toward the slightly open back door. The world was vibrant, sharp, and suddenly terrifyingly clear. My breath hitched in my throat as I pushed the back door open just enough to see without being seen. The scene that unfolded on our patio shattered the decade-long illusion I had lived under. Sarah was there, laughing, her head thrown back, a picture of carefree joy I hadn't seen in years. She was perched on the edge of the old wicker swing, her bare feet playfully kicking in the air. Opposite her, lounging comfortably in one of our Adirondack chairs, was Mark Peterson. His arm was casually draped over the back of her swing, his fingers idly tracing patterns on her shoulder. The air between them crackled with an undeniable intimacy, a closeness that transcended mere friendship. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the Mark I knew, the boisterous friend who joked about knowing too much about his life. This was a different Mark, his gaze fixed on Sarah with an intensity that spoke of something far deeper than platonic affection. And Sarah, her smile, the way she leaned into his touch, the easy familiarity of their interaction. It was a dance I hadn't been privy to, a silent language spoken between 2 people deeply entangled. "Oh, Mark," Sarah giggled, swatting his hand away playfully, though she made no real effort to stop him. "You're terrible." "Only for you, darling," Mark replied, his voice a low, throaty murmur that made my stomach churn. He leaned closer, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "You know how much I love making you laugh." My jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Darling." He called her darling. My darling. 1,000 questions screamed in my head. Questions I was terrified to answer. How long had this been going on? Had it started before my blindness, or had my vulnerability, my absolute reliance on her, somehow created the space for this betrayal to flourish? The thought was a searing brand on my soul. I wanted to burst out there, to scream, to demand answers. But a paralyzing numbness held me captive. I was a voyeur in my own home, watching my life unravel before my very eyes. I stood there, rooted to the spot, every nerve ending screaming, every detail burning itself into my memory. The way her hair caught the sunlight, the slight flush on her cheeks, the easy way she met his gaze. It was all so vivid, so horribly real. Suddenly, Sarah's expression shifted. A flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher crossed her face. She pulled slightly away from Mark, a subtle movement, almost imperceptible. "We should be careful," she whispered, her voice lower now. "David will be home soon." Mark chuckled, a dismissive sound that grated on my ears. "Oh, come on, Sarah. He's still practically blind. He won't notice a thing." Besides, he paused, his voice dropping even further, he's always so grateful for your dedication. It's almost sickeningly convenient, isn't it? The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping away every last vestige of my trust. Sickeningly convenient. The phrase echoed in my mind, each syllable dripping with venom. My dedication. Was that how she saw it? Was my blindness not a tragedy she grieved with me, but an opportunity she exploited? The pain was a raw, visceral ache that spread to my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The cold dread turned into a burning rage. I stumbled back, knocking a small decorative vase off a kitchen counter. The crash echoed through the silent house, a jarring sound that announced my presence. The laughter on the patio ceased abruptly. I heard a rustle of movement, a gasp. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, a response, anything that could make sense of this devastating revelation. Before I could collect myself, Sarah's voice, laced with alarm, cut through the silence. "David? Is that you? What was that noise?" I stood in the kitchen doorway, my eyes, which she believed to be almost useless, now pierced into a thin veil of deception. Mark was scrambling awkwardly from the Adirondack chair, his face a mask of sudden panic. Sarah, too, looked utterly horrified, her hands flying to her mouth. The picture they presented, guilt written all over their faces, was stark and undeniable. My voice, when it finally emerged, was a raw whisper, barely audible even to my own ears. "I can see you, Sarah." The color drained from her face, leaving her ashen. Mark froze, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the frantic beating of my own heart. The vibrant, clear world I had so recently regained suddenly felt dark and desolate, overshadowed by the painful truth that had just been unveiled. My miracle had become my curse, revealing a reality far crueler than any darkness I had ever known. The air crackled with a silence so profound, it felt heavier than any sound. Sarah's face was a study in horror, a mix of disbelief and utter dread. Mark, too, stood frozen, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed composure shattered. They looked like two deer caught in headlights, exposed and vulnerable. I finally pushed the door open fully and stepped on the patio, my gaze fixed on Sarah. My vision, so recently a miraculous gift, now felt like a cruel instrument of torture, forcing me to witness their shame. "How long, Sarah?" My voice was still a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade of trust, now crumbling into dust. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah stammered, her eyes darting between me and Mark. "David, I can explain." "Can you?" I cut her off, my voice gaining strength, though it still trembled with the effort to control the raw emotions surging through me. "Can you explain, sickeningly convenient? Is that what my blindness was to you? A convenience?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and she took a step towards me, her hand outstretched. "No, David, of course not. Please, let me. Don't touch me." The words ripped from my throat, sharper than I intended, but the thought of her touch, after what I had just witnessed, was repulsive. She flinched, her hand dropping to her side. Mark, meanwhile, had taken a step back, trying to melt into background, but I wouldn't let him. "And you, Mark." I turned my gaze to him, my voice colder now, laced with bitter contempt. "My friend, the man I trusted to look out for my wife, to be a good neighbor. This is how you look out for her?" Mark finally found his voice, though it was weak and strained. "David, I'm so sorry. It just happened. It just happened." I scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "For 10 years, you two have been playing me for a fool? While I sat in darkness, relying on her every word, you were, what? Laughing at me? Plotting your next rendezvous?" Sarah finally broke down, tears streaming freely down her face. "No, David, please, it wasn't like that. Not at first. It started after you went blind. I was lonely. You were so consumed by your condition, so distant. Mark was there for me. He listened. He understood." Her voice was pleading, desperate for me to understand, to forgive. My heart ached with a pain I hadn't known was possible. "Distant? I was blind. Sarah, I was fighting to adapt, to survive, and you found solace in another man's arms because I was distant? The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. I had been isolated by my blindness, and she had sought connection elsewhere. Not realizing I felt even more isolated by her betrayal. Mark, seeing an opening perhaps, tried to interject. We never meant to hurt you, David. It was just a moment of weakness. It spiraled. Weakness. I snarled, turning fully to him. You built a life on my weakness. You preyed on my vulnerability. You came into my home, broke bread with me, sat at my table, all while you were sleeping with my wife. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Sarah let out a strangled sob. It wasn't like that, David. Not always. There were times. We stopped. We tried to. But it was hard. Hard. I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. What was hard, Sarah? Pretending to be the devoted wife? Feigning concern for my recovery while you counted down the days until I was gone again, so you could be with him? Her silence was her confession. The weight of it pressed down on me, crushing any lingering hope that this was all a misunderstanding, a terrible dream. I looked at our patio, the very space where we had shared so many happy memories, now tainted by their deceit. The Adirondack chairs, the swing, the carefully tended potted plants, all seemed to mock me with their silent complicity. My gaze returned to Sarah, who stood slumped, defeated. Her tears seemed genuine now, but they offered little comfort. The image of her with Mark, their shared intimacy, was seared into my mind, an indelible stain. I need you to leave, Mark, I said, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of all emotion. Now. Mark hesitated for a moment, glancing at Sarah, who didn't meet his gaze. He nodded slowly, then turned and walked past me, his shoulders hunched. I watched him go, every fiber of my being recoiling from his presence. As the gate clicked shut behind him, the silence returned, heavier and more profound than before. It was just Sarah and me, standing amidst the wreckage of our life. David, Sarah began, her voice barely a whisper. What are we going to do? I turned to her, my heart a hollowed-out cavern. You tell me, Sarah, I said, my voice flat, because for the first time in 10 years I can see everything. The days that followed were a blur of hushed tones and unbearable tension. Our house, once a sanctuary of comfort and shared silences, became a tomb of unspoken words and lingering accusations. Sarah tried to talk, to explain, to plead for forgiveness, but her words fell hollow, echoing the bitter phrase, sickeningly convenient in my mind. Every gesture of hers, every sympathetic glance, was now filtered through the lens of her betrayal, making it impossible for me to accept. The intimacy we had once shared, born of trust and vulnerability, was irrevocably shattered. I spent most of my time outside, walking the familiar streets of our neighborhood, seeing them for the first time with clarity. The vibrant colors of the autumn leaves, the intricate architecture of the Victorian homes, the children laughing as they rode their bikes, all of it was a visual feast, yet felt strangely muted by the dull ache in my chest. My miracle had not brought the unadulterated joy I had anticipated. Instead, it had unveiled a truth more painful than any physical darkness. I saw the world, but I no longer saw the person I thought I knew. Our friends, oblivious of the chasm that had opened between us, would call, wondering why we hadn't been around. I made excuses, vague mentions of my recovery requiring more rest, Sarah chiming in with equally unconvincing reassurances. The thought of facing them, of pretending everything was fine, was unbearable. How could I explain that the woman they admired for her unwavering devotion to her blind husband was, in fact, living a double life? The shame was suffocating, not just for them, but for me, for having been so utterly blind in more ways than one. One evening, after another silent dinner, a meal Sarah had prepared with nervous energy that was palpable, I finally spoke. I can't do this, Sarah. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Do what, David? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Pretend. I replied, the word a heavy stone in the air. Pretend that everything is okay. Pretend that I don't see what I saw. Pretend that 10 years of my life, 10 years of my trust, weren't just a stage for your affair. Her head dropped. It wasn't like that, David. It became complicated. I know I messed up. I truly regret it. Regret what, Sarah? I pressed, my voice flat. That you got caught? Or that you hurt me? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like my blindness was the only thing protecting you. The moment I gained my sight, your secret was exposed. She lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. I loved you, David. I still do. But I was so lost, so alone. You were just gone inside yourself. I tried to reach you, but you were just a shadow. A shadow you chose to abandon for a real man, I suppose? My sarcasm was a bitter bomb, offering no real comfort. A shadow you used as an excuse to betray everything we built. She flinched, but didn't deny it. The truth, stark and painful, hung between us. It was clear there was no going back, no stitching together the tattered remnants of what we once had. The foundation of our marriage had been built on a lie, a betrayal that flourished in the darkness. My newfound sight had brought not only light to my eyes, but also a harsh, undeniable clarity to my reality. I think we need to separate, Sarah, I said, the word surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my soul. I need time to process this, to figure out who I am now, without the shadow of your deceit hanging over me. And without you. Her gasp was a sharp intake of breath, but she offered no argument. She simply nodded, tears continuing to fall. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that this was the inevitable end. The pain was immense, a deep, gnawing emptiness, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of resolve began to ignite. I had survived blindness for 10 years. I could survive this. I had seen the world, truly seen it, and now I had to see my path forward, alone. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with the daunting prospect of rebuilding a life I thought was secure, but at least now, I could see where I was going. True sight extends beyond the eyes. It is a clarity to perceive truth, even when it shatters illusions, and the courage to rebuild your world on foundations of authenticity and self-worth.